good.
We have a congregational meeting on the 23rd to talk about the Christ South bill. So that's exciting. And we're going to have it's going to be on a Zoom, not like on our YouTube. It's going to be a Zoom because we have to take a vote. And we got the legal word from the synod that you can do online voting if there's that opportunity to speak and to be heard. But online you can only hear, but you got to be able to speak as well. So of course Zoom will do that, and then you can raise your hand in that Zoom meeting, and so we can do that. Part of the whole new brave world.
Sure is. Ever changing. Is there a registration for that meeting, or is it just come the congregation? You don't have to register in advance for that meeting.
So you saw the CDC came out, and we had this outdoors. We could all take off our masks, and that's good news. Can Cooper say maybe by June 1st, go a little bit more? Looking forward to maybe fall having somewhat of a regular kickoff, bringing people back together again. But I think we're just going to stay with the 2 worship services at 9, and we decided 10:45 or 11
for the summertime. 10:45.
For the summertime, it'll be 10:45. For the fall,
right back to 11.
Yeah, I don't know. There's not going to be a class in between.
Right.
So we could probably keep it at 10:45.
The musicians, they get particular about that a little bit.
Those musicians
trying to remember what's for
high maintenance. They're just high maintenance. So yeah, for the summertime, it'll be Memorial Weekend, 10:45 for late service. So we're going to have a different kind of Sunday school in the fall. Drew and I have, and Pastor Melody have kind of held on to a more of a traditional Sunday school. 3rd grade girls, 3rd grade boys, 4th grade. And because we had the kids, we had lots of kids. Where our peers across the country, especially larger churches, are getting rid of Sunday school altogether. They might have it for up to 5th grade. And they might have it, that you begin with worship and you leave, the kids leave, and then, and that's what they do in South, Christ South. They have opening songs and the kids leave and do blast. What does blast stand for?
I don't know.
It's something really cool. It's an acronym.
Bible learning.
Yeah. So it works well down there. So we're going to use the same model here. So it's going to be like preschool to 5th grade. Instead of coming into church at 9 or 11 o'clock, they're going to go to their class. But their class are going to be clumped together like a VBS. So it's K through 2nd grade, I think, and then 3 through 5th grade. And they'll be in a larger space like this. They'll have music and a big lesson, maybe some skits or whatever else they're going to do. Almost like a Christ Kids TV and VBS kind of combined. Confirmation age kids, they should be in church. They should be in church. They're old enough to sit through church. But they're not coming to Sunday school. They haven't been. We've got like 40 kids per grade, 120 kids, 3 years. But on Sunday morning, we might get 20 or 30 for those confirmation, even though it's required. So we're going to switch confirmation classes to Wednesdays nights. And combine confirmation. They come from 6:45, they do their fun games, socializing, getting to know you, and everything else. And then another 45 minutes of catechetical work. And if they come en masse, they're going to bring their parents and their siblings. And so we're going to have some new people leading up the experience. Mark has taken off for the experience. And Bill Porter will be helping out with the experience along with Christian Cavazos. Hopefully that our adult education class will grow as well. So some changes for the fall. COVID, I think, and then of course everything needs to be hybrid, just kind of keeping the momentum going. All right. Well, I have to leave in about an hour, so I'm going to kick this off. Hey there, Paul.
Let's go on back.
I want to kick this off with a just a read. This book, I mean, all the books are very important. All the epistles are very important to first ground ourselves in the historical setting and the reason for the letter and the issue. So let's just go back to that in a second. Remember, Paul would go on these missionary trips. He would set up churches. He would stay for a fairly considerable long length of time, train up leaders, make sure it's going well, and then move on to the next church. Now, these were primarily Gentiles because he would first go to the synagogues. The synagogues would kick him out or stone him or beat him. And so he would shake the dust off his sandals. And then he would go on to the Gentiles who, for the most part, received him well. So he left, and of course, the Galatian church, there were some, and they're called Judaizers. Judaizers are Jewish Christians who really believe that you have to first become Jewish before you become Christian. Christian is a fulfillment of Judaism, but the path to Christianity is through Judaism. So they would follow Paul and wreak all kinds of havoc. Say, yes, you're kind of a Christian, but if you really want to be a Christian, you have to follow these dietary laws. You have to follow these festivals. And of course, the big issue is circumcision. That was the big issue. And so evidently, these Galatian people did not hold firm. They didn't hold the wall. Because as soon as these Judaizers came, it sounds like they quickly reverted and started doing those Jewish practices. Or else Paul would have no reason. I mean, we would have liked to have thought the Galatians would say, "No way, Moshe, we don't do this. We are Christians. We have never been slaves to anyone." But they must have fallen. And that is the occasion of the writing of the letter. Paul hears of this, and he writes, take a look at Galatians chapter 1, again, to set the tone. Paul is angry. I don't know, angry or frustrated, but it sounds angry to me. Chapter 1, verse 6, I'm astonished, I'm surprised that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of God. And you turn to a different gospel. Not that there's another gospel. But there are some who troubled you. They want to pervert the gospel of Christ. And here's that strong, strong verse. But if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we preach, let him be damned to hell. Let him be anathema. Let him be cursed. The strongest language that he could possibly give. And then Paul goes on to give his credentials. He's not doing this to please himself or please other people. He is indeed an apostle, even though a lot of these Judaizers would not call him an apostle because he was not one of the original 12. But Paul says, I am too. And not because somebody laid hands on me, and not because somebody ordained me, not because I followed or graduated, but I'm an apostle because of Jesus Christ. He has set me apart to be apostle.
I tried that at seminary.
How'd it go?
They wouldn't buy it. They said,
He said, no way.
yeah, but the Lord told me. I'm good. I said, no, sorry. That's it, right? Well, that's a good point. That the Lutheran Church says you have to have both, the inner call and the outer call. You can't just have one.
Yeah, you know what, Paul? Drew, right?
Something like that.
You know what Drew is? Because there are people who go to church and feel in their heart, I am called to be a pastor. That's who I am. And then they do miserably in seminary, but they still say, I'm called to be a pastor. And then they get to the, what's the oral exam at the end called?
The endorsement.
The endorsement. Is that for the candidacy? This is so long ago. Is that for the candidacy committee?
It is.
Yeah, the candidacy committee says, we don't think you're ready. But then you say, I am called. And then you put your name out there, which would never get to that point. But if you put your name out there and no church picks you up, no church, then you're not a pastor. You may think you are. I mean, you can start your own church in your garage or something.
Yeah.
So you distracted me. Where were we going? Perfect. All right. So then Paul got his credentials from Jesus, and then he says, I even took on the guys in Jerusalem. I took on Cephas to his face, saying that this is what's happening in the field. Remember, we went back to Acts. And in that Council of Jerusalem, it was a big, big deal. Again, it would be like, coming in here today and saying, I am now whatever the new religion is, and I'm telling you, you don't need baptism. And communion is a thing of the past. It would cause a huge stir. But Paul reminds us that the Council of Jerusalem made a decision. And Peter got up and stood before everyone saying, it seems good to the Holy Spirit and to us. The Gentiles who believe and receive the gospel do not have to submit to circumcision. But they do have to. Do you remember what they do have to do?
Care for the poor and abstain from blood.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
And abstain from what idols sacrifice or meat sacrificed to idols, which even Paul then lifted in Corinthians. He said, even that's silly.
Right.
All right, so now we have gone through the first 2 chapters. And here's the point. At this point, so many of us buckle. We're having that late night conversation with a friend of ours who's a skeptic. And the skeptic says, but at least you have to do something, don't you? It can't be free. It can't just be for everyone. It can't be just God waving his magic arm and saying, oh, y'all, come on in. You got to do something, don't you? At that point, later tonight, after hours of arguing, you are tempted to buckle, aren't you? You're saying, okay, you at least have to go to church. You at least have to pray. You at least have to accept Jesus Christ, your personal Lord and Savior. You at least have to be sincere about it. You at least have to have a date on the calendar in which you were not a Christian and now you are a Christian. I mean, it's so easy to buckle at this point. It's so easy to buckle. And yet, as we see here in Galatians chapter 2, verse 19, for I through the law died to the law that I may live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. I do not nullify the grace of God. For if justification were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. If we're going to put any emphasis on us in some sort of a synchronistic way, that God and I did this together. I remember a story, you probably remember this from your Chapel Hill days. It may, because it deals with Michael Jordan. I remember when one of his playoffs, when he was just killing it with, 50 points a game. And the Bulls were winning so much that they could bring in the scrubs. And this first year got to play, and he's out there and he gets fouled and he shoots a free throw. And of course the Bulls just destroy their enemy, the opponent. And then this first year got to have an interview with ESPN. And he said, well, what was it like? He said, it was amazing. my first professional basketball game, and Michael and I are a team. Do you realize together we scored 51 points? That's how insane it is for us to say, together, God and I worked out my salvation. You need a little bit of help just to get over the edge. And I was just thankful that I could be there for him. Don't buckle. Don't buckle. You want to jump in? You want me to continue? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just, you probably pointed this out last week, but in the first chapter, it's significant that in every other epistle we have from Paul, he always begins with a word of thanksgiving. Just thanking the people for all of your gifts. I pray for you, and you bring me joy, and I rejoice in all that you are. And Galatians, he omits that. He just dives right into the verse 6. I'm astonished so quickly. So
yeah, we read Philippians, this glowing love letter.
Right.
Thank you. I love you.
The epistle of joy. Yeah. So but I think it's important because every word here Paul is saying is gospel in the sense that it's all the good news. But sometimes the good news looks like confrontation. It looks like having the friend who is going to have the love enough for you that they're going to help you see where you are buckling, where you are. And we see that in chapter 3 when Paul starts off. You foolish Galatians, he says. I'm always a little bit unsure how to respond when people say, we really enjoyed your sermon. Or which doesn't happen all that often, but
but if it were, I can imagine.
I know, right? You can imagine, hypothetically. But no, of course I know what we say thank you, but part of preaching too, there's multiple facets of a sermon. Part of it hopefully is convicting. Part of it you would say, I wish you wouldn't have said that to me because it hurt, it stung, or it's not me saying, but the word of God saying, this is where we need to confess, repent, come back to Christ as our Savior. So Paul, when he's saying, you foolish Galatians, they would not have said, we really enjoy that. Thank you for this. But he's saying he loves them so much that he is confronting them that they are looking to have that relationship with God through their own effort, through their own works. And you can understand the appeal because in every other realm of life, do you receive without working for it? At least, hopefully. No. In your job, in your whatever kind of school, it's all merit-based, right? It's all about doing and earning. And what do you feel when you have earned it? Pride, right? You feel good. I earned this. I deserve this. Here's what Martin Luther said is the problem, though. When you live your life and your spiritual life based on that kind of spirituality, you're forever fluctuating between pride and despair. You're inflated and thinking what I've done is so good, or you're thinking I have completely blown this. God must not like me. And Luther felt that despising of himself. So Paul is really trying to liberate them through the gospel to not live in that roller coaster, but to feel the hope of what Pastor Scott's saying when we're saved by grace through faith. So you fools, who's bewitched you? Although you can understand the persuasion of these Judaizers that it sounds good. If I do this, I can show what I've done. Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was portrayed as crucified.
Let me go back to the word bewitched. Any other translations there?
Good question.
Mine says bewitched too. All right. Not that one, it was just an old translation.
Yeah, right.
Tabitha, I just think like
Sabrina, the teenage
Sabrina.
Yeah. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by observing the law or by believing what you heard? Remember, for Paul, how does the Christian life begin? It comes through hearing. He talks about that in Romans very clearly, that faith is a gift that God gives as we hear the word preached and sung, and that our liturgy, the way we worship and live in community, that's all a word, so to speak, that God is imparting the Spirit to us. In baptism or in the Holy Communion, we call those the means of grace. And the power of both the sacraments is not in the bread or the water, which are just ordinary elements, but in the word. It's the word spoken that we hear those words for you. You are a child of God in the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit, and the Holy Spirit comes. Are you so foolish? It almost sounds like a parent who is just like, we have a relative the other day, she was texting, and she slammed into the car in front of her, airbag went off, and then 4 other cars slammed into each other. Her parents had talked to her, don't text, my sister, don't text and drive, don't text and drive. How have you, we talked to you so many times about this, how can you still do it? Very parental sounding here. After beginning with the Spirit, are you now trying to attain your goal by human effort? Have you suffered so much for nothing? If it really was for nothing, what would they have suffered? Any thoughts on that in verse 4? What do you think Paul's pointing to in terms of have you suffered for nothing?
Like circumcision.
Yeah, that'd be right. That would be a suffering for nothing. Another one may be that when they as Greeks, and remember this, Galatia is a region. A lot of times Paul's writing to cities like Philippi or Corinth. Galatia is the region in modern-day Turkey. And so it's a cluster of churches, kind of like a synod almost. But when they left their Greek religion to become Christian, there would have been probably some suffering from that too. Families that would have turned away from them or put them out. And Paul's saying, really, did you walk away from those other faith, the faith you had, and endure all of that, now to go back into slavery here? Have you suffered so much for nothing if it really was for nothing? Does God give you his Spirit and work miracles among you because you observe the law or because you believe what you heard? Isn't that powerful that Paul's acknowledging that there are miracles in their midst? We know, yeah.
I hear this, and your voice sounds much more kind. I'm hearing he's wrapping it up with these rhetorical questions.
Right.
I mean, just kind of imagine this, or give the answer that's supposed to be the answer. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law? No.
Right.
By hearing with the faith? Yes. Are you so foolish? Having begun with the Spirit? Are you going to end with the flesh? No. Did you experience anything in faith? Yeah. And then finally builds up. Does he who supplied the Spirit to you work miracles among you? Do so by works of the law or by hearing the faith? I mean, he just is crescendoing and he's coming up with the obvious answers to these questions.
Yes, highlighting that. And for Paul, it all goes back to the Spirit. We're going to look at that in the latter part of Galatians. But the other thing is, does God give you a Spirit and work miracles among you because you observe the law, because you believe what you heard? Yeah, he's driving that. Later he's going to say too, I wish I could be there in person so I could change my tone. But through the written word, you can't. But yeah, I think Pastor Scott's exactly right. So this is the little intro in chapter 3 before he's going to shift gears and go back to the Old Testament to highlight where his reasoning is coming from. Because again, these Jewish Christians who you can sympathize with them. Like Pastor Scott said, we're reading a book right now on Wednesday morning called Irresistible by Andy Stanley. And he talks about the revolutionary power of the early church, what made it irresistible. He said if one of us were to stand up on Sunday morning close to Christmas and say, this year, we decided that instead of celebrating Jesus' birthday, we're going to celebrate one of our birthdays. You'd be like, we're out of here. But that's essentially what Jesus was doing. Saying, instead of you going to the temple, something greater than the temple is here. Guess who it is? It's me. And a lot of the Pharisees said, what are you doing? But for Paul, too, to talk about walking away the religious customs and traditions of Judaism had that kind of shock value. So we often paint the Pharisees as these really bad, malicious people, but you can empathize with why they were so offended by Paul and these Jewish Christians too. This was who they were. It's radical. So Paul's got to go back to the Old Testament to say, it's biblical. I'm not making this up. I'm going to show you from Abraham where this comes from. You want to speak on that?
Verse 6. Thus Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteous. Anybody remember that story where this comes up? Who wants to tell the story?
Sarah,
You remember it?
father of many nations.
Yeah, but where did this verse come up? What was the context? What was happening? It had been several years after the promise. Abraham received the promise that one day, you're going to be the father of a great nation. You're going to have descendants more than the stars. And then it had been, I don't know, it had been a dozen years or something, and still he's childless. And then he's figuring that this is not going to happen. And actually, Abraham makes the mistake thinking that God can't possibly do this all by himself. I know, I'll use Sarah's handmaiden, and I'll help poor God out because he seems to can't. All right, don't help God out like that. Anyways, so Abraham is despondent. It's not going to happen. That's where God takes him out. Takes him out and says, look at the stars, count the stars. He says, I can't count the stars. God says, so shall your descendants be. You've got to believe me and put your trust in me. And then God does this most unusual thing. He takes what I think maybe a lamb, maybe is it a calf too? I'm not sure. Maybe some birds are in there as well. And he cuts them. And he opens them up. And then that late at night, this smoking flesh pot passes through these severed animals. You're wondering, what in the world is going on here? Well, the word covenant literally means to cut. You cut a deal, you cut a promise, you cut a covenant. And what God is doing, he's walking through these animals. And God is making the most profound promise that he can ever make. He's saying, cross my heart, and I hope to die. Because by walking through the midst of these animals, he's really saying, let this happen to me. Let me be cut in half if I do not fulfill my promise to you, Abraham. And then it says that Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteous. So Paul's making the argument from the very beginning, from the father of a great nation. He was saved not because he left Ur to go, and not because he faithfully sacrificed or tried to sacrifice his son on a mountain, but from the very beginning, it was always, always, always based on faith. Verse 7. So you see that it is men of faith who are the sons of Abraham. Who's he talking to here? Who's the audience?
Gentiles.
The Gentiles. So he's telling them, you are part of the covenant. You are the true Israel. You are the true sons of Abraham. Verse 8, and the scriptures, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in you all nations will be blessed. Now, you'll miss the wordplay here. You'll miss the wordplay here. The word for nations is ethnos, from which we get the word ethnic. It's an ethnic neighborhood made of people of different nations. And the word for Gentile is very similar to it. It is like, it's off a little bit. This is what, ethnia or something? Nation and Gentile are basically the same word. So here he says in verse 8, said to Abraham, in you all the Gentiles will be blessed. So from the very beginning again, going into all the nations, Paul is saying, you were in God's heart when he made this covenantal promise. Cross my heart and hope to die. Verse 9. So then those who are men of faith are blessed with Abraham who had faith. Let's take works.
Good. So then, what would the response be of those on the other side? How are they going to argue against Paul? And he says, yeah, but God made this covenant by faith with Abraham. What are they going to say? What do you think?
Why did he give the law?
Yeah.
Right. So then why Moses? Why make a covenant with Moses? Why not just let this Abrahamic covenant stand? And so they had a good argument. We know Moses was up on Mount Sinai in Exodus after they come out of Egypt, that God gives them the law and the tablets, not once, but twice, after first time he smashes them when they are worshiping the golden calf. And God says, when you come into the promised land, what you need to center your life around will be me, but what's going to help you do that will be all these laws. And we know the 10 Commandments are sort of the Cliff Notes version of the 600 laws, of which there were different types. There were the ritual laws of what the priest should wear. There were the moral laws of who should you marry and what should you do if somebody gored your servant. And so dietary laws, what types of foods to eat and not eat. So that's an important thing. Not all the laws were in the same category for the Jewish people. There were these different types of law. But so the Jewish Christians would have said, but yeah, there's Moses. So verse 10, all who rely on observing the law are under a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written in the book of the law. See, this is the catch. And this is what Jesus was so clear to point out to the Pharisees and those who insisted on following the law as a way to purity and holiness. Remember what he says. In fact, in the Gospels, Jesus says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you cannot have the kingdom of God. And at which point people listening would have said,
oh, come on!
You're telling me I've got to be like an all-star. These are the all-stars of religious stuff. And you're saying, unless I'm like them or better than them, then I can't have the kingdom of God. Jesus would have said yes. And guess what? You can't get there. None of us can. And they think they can, but that's the problem, is they're still relying on their own strength. And if you break one, you've broken all of them. Because what is the law ultimately about? It's summarized in Leviticus 19. Love thy neighbor. All the laws are pointing to that. Love God first and then love neighbor itself. But it's about love. If you break not honoring your mother and father, well, guess what? You've not loved. And it trickles into all the other ways that you live. So there's this curse that God talks about in Deuteronomy, that there's the conditional nature of the Mosaic covenant. As long as if you follow the law, then you'll be blessed. If you don't, they'll be cursed. We talked about this past Sunday with Ruth. Why is there famine in the land? Because the people have not obeyed the law. They have worshipped other gods. They have let themselves be unloving, unjust. So what's happened? There's been this famine. Now you can read that spiritually. What does the famine represent? The breakdown of society. So what do you do about the curse? Clearly no one is justified, verse 11, before God by the law, because the righteous will live by faith. Paul's quoting here a prophet we read from last fall, Habakkuk. And Luther loved this little verse too, where he says, the righteous will live by faith. So even the Old Testament prophets say this and affirm that it's through faith that righteousness or right relationship comes. Verse 12, the law is not based on faith. On the contrary, the man who does these things will live by them. It's all about action. It's all about not trust in who God is, but it's about demonstrating your own goodness, so to speak.
I love what Paul does here. He almost sets this up, and he says, you got a choice. A is living under the law. These Judaizers came, they told you to do this and that. If you want to do that, all right, this is what it means. There's 613 of them, and you've got to obey each one of them. And God's standard is 100%. 100% is pass. Anything less is fail. God is not going to judge on a curve.
Right.
All right? It's got to be, that's why he said to perfection, exceed that of the righteousness. So he said, if you want to go down this path, be my guest. It's got to be 100%. Now, there's only been one person who's ever passed that test. You could be the second one. You could be the second, yeah. It's unlikely. But here's the B, living not by the works, but by the faith.
Yes. That's it. Yeah, and somebody has to endure the curse. And so verse 15, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. How does that work? By enduring the very worst of human hatred, violence, all the possible worst that humanity could do to God, taking that upon himself, receiving that. And then Paul even is going to quote again from the Old Testament in verse 13, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. This is one of the reasons that some Jewish people say he could never have been the Messiah. The scripture said, if anybody's hung on a tree, they're cursed. There's no way Jesus could therefore be the son of David, that he could be the king. And Paul says, you're right. He does say that. And he was cursed, but he wasn't because of what he did, but because of what we did. He took our punishment and curse upon himself. You're right about that. He redeemed us in order that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles through Christ Jesus, so that by faith we might receive the promise of the Spirit. The blessing given to Abraham, which is adoption. Remember a sermon you gave one time of, if you want proof of God, look at the Jewish people. I mean, how odd of God to choose the Jews. It wasn't because they were the biggest nation, the most powerful, but they're adopted and loved. And
because they were so obedient. And
right. Yeah, not at all. I mean, yeah. But that's the blessing of Abraham. Is what he means there is, I think he's saying, the blessing given to Abraham of being adopted and welcomed in as a child of the king, you will have that too. And another thing Andy Stanley talked about in that book we're reading that's really helpful is of all the people I've known that have turned away from Christianity, only one has ever had a really theological reason for doing that. Others have said, Dave, do you remember any of the specific examples, reasons that they...
Usually a pastor upsets them.
Yes.
The church wasn't there when I was sick.
Yes.
The church is a bunch of hypocrites. I saw this person.
Bingo. Right.
But only one had a theological reason. Huh?
And it was a Jewish rabbi who said, the reason I can't be a Christian is because no one person can bear the sins of another, the punishment of that. And so that was his justification. The other day that I was reading the Psalms, and I came across Psalm 49. I just wanted to share this because I had never noticed this before, but verse 7 of Psalm 49 says this: no man can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for him. The ransom for a life is costly. No payment is ever enough that you should live on forever and not see decay. No man can redeem the life of another. But then if you look at verse 15, he says this, but God will redeem my life from the grave. He will surely take me to himself. And so I'm struck by that because the rabbi's right. No human can pay for another, but God can. And Jesus, being perfect, does that. Pretty cool.
Now in verse 15, he gets into this Abrahamic covenant. I think he's starting to split hairs a little bit, but he's making a point. If you want to go the Old Testament route, here's what the Old Testament says. 15, to give a human example, brethren, no one annuls a man's will or adds to it once it's been ratified, all right? So the reading of the will, it is what it is, and you fulfill it. Now the promise, that is the will, was made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say and to his offsprings. Now in English, offspring is probably a collective plural too. So the point is probably hard to make here. It's almost like in Genesis 3 when it says, you know, to the Eve and the snake, he's gonna crush. There will rise up one offspring of Eve. Is it plural or is it singular?
Ours says, mine says the seed rather than offspring.
That even makes it a better point, because seed would be a collective plural as well.
Yeah. Later on, it's plural.
Yeah. All right, so referring to one and to your offspring, which is Christ. So Paul is making the argument that the promise made to Abraham and to his offspring, i.e. Jesus. 17, this is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterward, does not annul a covenant previous ratified by God. So that's the question about, well, what about Moses? It doesn't annul the previous covenant. Now, what would Andy Stanley say about that when he says about the new covenant? You know, I was reading that today, and I think he overstated a bit about getting rid of that old stuff,
Right.
you know, so I thought it was just a little overstated. But here he says that original covenant with Abraham has already been ratified. The promise cannot be made void. 18. For if the inheritance is by the law, it is no longer by promise. But God gave it to Abraham by promise. By promise. Cling to the promise. And I love this function of the law. You know, really quickly, Martin Luther had these two uses of the law. Remember this? What's the first use of the law?
It's a mirror, like a.
No, that's the second.
Oh, so the first.
First part of the first use of the law. What part of no don't you understand?
Rule.
What part of don't you understand?
A rule or a curve?
Yeah. So the first use of the law is tell you to do this and don't do that. And Luther said that's kind of just the basic elementary. The important one was the second use of the law, and that's what he's getting at here. That the law opens up our eyes. Let's see how it does it. Why then the law? It was added because of our transgression until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made. It was ordained by angels through the intermediary. Now, an intermediary implies more than one, but God is one. You see, it's a little complicated here. He doesn't even get into the second use of the law here. Is the law then against the promise of God? Certainly not. For if a law had been given which could make alive, then righteousness would have indeed come to the law. For the scripture consigns all things to sin, that what was promised in faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. So the second use of the law then is the law opens up our eyes and realizes that we do indeed covet. We do indeed kill. Maybe not physically murder, maybe not even pummel a person, but with our words. We do indeed steal. If not things, maybe ideas, maybe. So you can go through each one of those commandments. And Paul says that opens up our eyes. And so that's what Luther said, the second use of the law.
I like his rhetorical style that it's really effective because he will ask these questions, like in verse 21, anticipating what people will say, and how it's really helpful.
He does that a lot. Corinthians, in that 15, when you talk about the resurrection.
Right.
Did Christ start this? Did Christ do this? Did Christ do that? Yeah. If there is none, then this is that. So this is, he was a top orator of his time. And that Greco way of arguing is very clear here.
And then, and so then the other charge, that this is going to open it up to is, and he talks about this in Romans and other places. In fact, which letter is it he says, should we go on sinning so that grace should abound? By no means. Romans 6. Yeah. But, you can follow the logic that if Paul's saying that the law is not meant to be kind of the rule book, what's to keep a person from just living however you want to? And that's where he's going to say, is he's building with his argument here up to what it means to live by the Spirit, to have Jesus in you. It's the power of Christ who is going to conform us to what the law is meant to be, the law of Christ or the law of love. And it's the reason we're in verse 23, back in chapter 3, we're held prisoners by the law is because it's that Spirit, the Spirit has not yet been given. The law is put in charge to lead us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. Now that faith has come, we are no longer under the supervision of the law. That's one of his favorite metaphors. It's like the law is kind of the guardian when you're young and you need the supervision of an older one. And in verse 26, you come to one of the most powerful parts of the whole letter. You are all children of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For all of you who are baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. Baptism gets mentioned here as something really happens there. It's not just an outward symbol of your commitment to Jesus, but it's God clothing you with, joining you to the divine life. There is now neither Jew nor Greek. Man, huge. Slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. At verse 28 is, it's hard to overstate how revolutionary that is.
Certainly in a society back then, it's even today, of course, we want to figure out hierarchy. And we figure out hierarchy based on where you live, or your job, or your title. I remember when I was living in Japan, business cards were huge. Everybody had to have a business card. And whenever you met somebody for the first time, you would hold your business card like it was a treasure, and you would give it to each other, and then you bow and, oh, thank you so much, and you would take their business card. What they were doing was that they were figuring out how to change their language based on seniority and inferiority. So there's, like in English, if you want to say thank you, I suppose you could say it in a very casual way, say thanks. If you wanted to go a little bit more, you could say thank you. You could say thank you very much. And I suppose you could add to it and make it a little bit more formal. But in Japan, I might get this wrong, but there's something like 7 different layers of formality that you would say. So thanks would be domo, or a little bit more domo arigato. And he keeps on going up. And so the business card is trying to figure this thing out. How do I adjust my language based on who you are and who I am? And what Paul is doing here, and of course, we always say that the Middle East, where they're from here, is really Oriental in much of its culture. There's an Oriental culture here. And so everything's a pecking order. Everything's a pecking order. And so for Paul to dismantle that was revolutionary.
So honor and shame based. That's so important. Good. Chapter 4, he's going to continue, now he's going to keep building on that, but he's going to stick with this idea of being a child of God here in chapter 4. What I'm saying is that as long as the heir is a child, he's no different from a slave. When Paul's talking about it, though, he's talking about the Spirit, what the Spirit's going to do. He's subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by the father. So even though the child can have all this money in the bank that their parents have given them, but until they reach a certain age, they can't touch any of it. So it really doesn't make a difference in that way between them and the household servant. So also, when we were children, we were in slavery under the basic principles of the world. So there Paul's talking about when they were prior to Christ, they were still children, waiting for that fulfillment of the inheritance.
So how does your end of 3 go?
Mine says, we were in slavery under the basic principles of the world.
Basic principles of the world, as you're saying.
Spiritual forces of the world.
Spiritual forces.
Elementary principles.
What's that?
Elementary principles. And I think that was a kind of a phrase that was used widely in the Greek world.
Yeah, mine says elemental spirits of the universe. I thought that maybe Paul was suggesting that, before you come to Christ, and certainly
We're not muted.
certainly with this
Bring it up to you.
they were big into
Across the line.
and the stars and all the constellations. And I thought this was always referring to that you were part of that whole culture that was very using this astrology and the elemental spirits, but that translation is
Yeah.
Oh,
Bob, did you have a comment?
mine said Jewish laws and rituals.
really
That's very different.
Yeah.
Tell them what version you're reading.
This is from the Living Bible.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. So all of these concepts are kind of driving at the same thing. What was shaping your purpose was the world's idea that you get what you earn. You get what you think you earned or you deserve, so to speak. Verse 4, but when the time had fully come.
The fullness of time.
The fullness of time. That is so comforting because it shows how, from our vantage point, we wonder sometimes why God maybe is not acting more quickly. Or has God forgotten about the promise, or has God given up on that? And all throughout the Bible, you have these two different words for time. You have the Greek word chronos, which is chronological time. Then you have kairos, which means a divine moment, to use a fullness, the right time in a God divine way. That we've talked about this before last fall about how all the things were in place when Jesus was born. It was a perfect point in history for the gospel then to spread and for it to be fulfilled. God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive the full rights of sons. Luke is big about this. Luke goes to great lengths in his gospel to show how Jesus is under the law. 8 days after Jesus is born, what do Mary and Joseph do?
To the temple.
They bring him up and for circumcision. Then they present him, and you have Simeon and Anna, the prophetess. And so Jesus spends a lot of time in the temple. I mean, and his life is shaped by the law, fulfilling it. Because you are sons, Because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of His Son into our hearts. The Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. Now, he could have used any number of words there. Why would Paul use the word that Jesus probably would have used when he was a little boy talking to his Heavenly Father? The Aramaic word for not just formal father, but daddy, papa. There is such intimacy there that would have really, again, been kind of shocking, because to refer to God with that level of closeness would have been it's bold. So you're no longer a slave, but a son, and since you are a son, God has made you also an heir. One of the ways you feel the Spirit is that relationship, being able to pray to God as your Abba, as your, I heard once, one of my favorite Christian preachers, he said a very simple prayer when his heart is heavy that he prays is, Abba, I belong to you. Abba, I belong to you. It's a good one that if you just need something short to repeat, when your heart is heavy, Abba, I belong to you. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not God's. All throughout the Old Testament, you see that. But now that you know God, or rather are known by God, you're turning back to those weak and miserable principles.
Oh, mine's the elemental spirits.
Again, I like how Paul corrects himself there. He says, now that you know God, or rather, you're known by God. Because of what Jesus did, it opened the way for the God of heaven and His holiness to come close to know you in that way.
Just think what Paul would have done with that delete button.
Man,
I mean, it's you're dictating, and then, oh, that's not right. Papyrus is very expensive.
you gotta keep going.
No, it's deliberate.
Yeah.
Deliberate.
Drew,
I would use it. I would use that instruction.
this is Catherine. When I see that elementary principles of the world, I'm thinking about our world now. You're not successful unless you do so and so. You're not a Christian unless you do so and so. Things like that, that at least in America, United States, it's accepted. They're elementary. You are not an American unless you do A, B, C. You're not even a success unless you do A, B, and C. You see where I'm going? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, the elementary principles now are very shallow.
And I think especially when you talk about with Christianity, it always puzzles me when people say he was a good Christian or a good Christian man. Well, you're either Christian or not. It's or like the backsliding idea. Like, well, how do you qualify what's a good Christian or not? Because it's about faith and trust. There's so many ways you measure that. It's interesting. Paul talks about other examples, observing days and months and seasons and years. Paul says in other places, those are bad things in and of themselves. If you want to keep a liturgical season, we do that as Christian Lutherans, right? We have Advent and Lent, and we have seasons, festivals, but we're not putting our hope in them. We're honoring their purpose, which is to help us in our spiritual life to focus on Christ and His life. So it's about what their role is. So Paul doesn't say those are bad things, but what are you using them for? I fear for you, I've somehow wasted my efforts on you.
Ooh, that hurts.
Dicey.
That hurts. I've wasted my time on you.
You can see that scene in a movie in Hollywood. Coach says, I've wasted my time out there on the field, walking off. Yeah. No, coach, don't give up. I plead with you, brothers, become like me. Some people think Paul's a little arrogant when he says that kind of thing.
Yeah, but another place he says, chief sinner that I am.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I think, yeah.
He kind of goes both ways, depending on the audience and the need. I mean, certainly to this wayward group that buckled so quickly, be stalwart.
Yeah, right.
Don't give it up.
Yes, good. Now, and in verse 15, he talked about why did he get to know them? As you know, I was because of an illness. It was because of an illness I first preached the gospel to you. Paul was passing in that area, and we don't know what that illness was exactly, although it seems to have been something with his eyes, because later he's going to say, you would have torn out your own eyes and given them to me. So some people think Paul may have had an eye ailment, and so he couldn't physically keep going, so he stops here.
Yeah.
And then, even though my illness was a trial to you, you had to care for me, you did not treat me with contempt or scorn. Instead, you welcomed me, listen to this, as if I were an angel of God, as if I were Christ Jesus himself.
Go back to that line, though my condition was a trial. Now, why would it be a trial?
What's your sin?
What's that?
Even though my sickness was revolting to you.
You should-
Yeah,
Would it be a test? Would it be a test?
what?
Would it be a test?
Anything to me.
Would it
What
be
you
a
just
test?
said.
Yeah. Well, I think the trial is that if you are a holy man of God, bad things don't happen to you. And if you're not a holy one of God, then bad things will happen to you. It's that very elementary cause and effect. Almost an Old Testament cause and effect. Remember, Jesus said it doesn't work that way. So that was the trial. That was the trial. Can I believe this person who is suffering from some sort of ailment?
Yes. Because we know in Corinthians, Paul faces that head on with what he calls super apostles.
Super apostle, yeah.
Like a superhero, but who put Paul down because he had, his physical appearance wasn't impressive, and they use those things to say, look at him, he doesn't really measure up. So Paul confronted that a lot.
But here's that 15, that line about the eyes. What has become the satisfaction you felt? For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. Have I become your enemy by telling you the truth? That's his style again.
Yep.
It's that rhetorical question. He's not asking for a yes or no. There's an answer to that question. Have I become an enemy? No. They make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. You're building them up, huh? Those Judaizers. They're shutting you down. They'll build them up. We're the super Christians, we're the super apostles.
Right.
Yeah.
And I underline the first part of verse 15. Paul says, my translation, what has happened to all your joy? Anybody have wording on that?
Happy spirit.
I love that.
Yeah.
We're beginning and hearing about the freedom of grace.
Happy spirit, joy.
What is becoming the satisfaction you felt?
What's
Oh, like
become-
you're all better.
Yeah. This is one of what Paul's going to call the fruits of the Spirit, but, what happens when communities of faith turn inward and become judgmental and of each other and hold grudges and bickering, and what does that do to joy? It takes it away. And so Paul's saying, you're buying into this legalism, and look, your joy is gone. There's proof in the pudding here that this does not work. Those people are zealous, verse 17, to win you over, but for no good. What they want is to alienate you from us so that you may be zealous for them. What do you think Paul means by that? Be zealous for them. Any thoughts?
Sounds like this is not an isolated case. That there must have been two parallel paths, kind of that Pauline path and the Judaizer path. And they're going over and trying to get people to go on one side or the other.
Like a competition almost.
Analyze them, look at them, and I don't want to go over and talk about it, but they're the answer. They have the answer, not what I told you, the Gospels.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You're kind of like who has the biggest church, right? I mean, no, in the sense that, we're, in theory, you're both spreading the gospel, but underlying it, it says, yeah, but I'm doing better than you are
Right.
at spreading the gospel.
That's that human.
It is, and yeah, it is, and that's that reminder for us, especially as church leaders, that we have to stay out of the way. Our job is to be like John the Baptist and say, to point, behold the Lamb of God. When the focus starts being on the leader, then you're on thin ice somewhat there. Yeah, so that's a good point.
Court, we help. We'll see ya.
Have a good time on your retreat.
Yeah, well, senior pastors conference. So, you got Drew next week all by himself.
It's the best 2 chapters. You always think you're the best ones.
I want those too.
Man. Last time it was the resurrection chapters of John. Now I get to cover all the good parts about freedom in Christ next week. Yeah, but just a little bit more of chapter 4 here tonight. How I wish I could change my tone, verse 20, because I am perplexed about you. It seems like a mild word. Anybody have a different word there? Verse 20? Perplexed, yeah. Just confused, like a little bit more than just confused about you.
Different attitude.
We skipped over verse 19. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth, until what? Until Christ is formed in you. I love that because that shows the goal of the Christian life. That for Christ to be formed in us, that we would be little Christ, is Martin Luther's term, that we would more and more be less of us and more of him, and him living through us and shining through us. Good. All right, now he's going to continue the Abraham metaphor. And this is an interesting place. It helps us to understand how do you interpret the Bible in verse 21. We talk about this a lot lately. There's always layers of scripture. We did this with John last fall too, but there's always the literal layer of what happened, and then there's always the symbolic or the metaphorical layer of how you can read these stories. And up and down Christianity, church leaders have done this. So Hagar, who is who for Abraham?
Handmaiden of Sarah.
Right. So really more for Sarah. She was her handmaiden. Good. And Pastor Scott talked just a moment ago about how doubting the way that God would fulfill the promise, Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham. They have a baby. And then Hagar says, held her in contempt or viewed her with sometimes a stronger, like she despised her or was, with Sarah, you can imagine maybe the feelings of jealousy, of insufficient, whatever she might have felt. But Paul's going to take this story and read it metaphorically. For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the slave woman and the other by the free woman. His son by the slave woman, who came first, was born in the ordinary way. So what was his name again?
Ishmael.
Right. And remember our Muslim friends trace their ancestry to Ishmael. And according to the Quran, Ishmael was the chosen son and not Isaac. So that's part of where the ancient disagreement between Jews and Muslims goes back to. But it's a good reminder we have, as Christians, Jews, and Muslims, we all have a common parent in Abraham and Sarah, father. So the son of the slave woman, Ishmael, was born the ordinary way. The son of the free woman, who was not the handmaiden, Sarah, was born as a result of the promise. And what made her birth so unordinary again?
He was old, 90.
She was so old, yeah, that when God told her what was going to happen, what did she do?
Laugh.
She laughed. Don't you love that she names him Isaac, which means laughter? Because she denies it. God says, why did you laugh? She says, I didn't laugh. He says, I am God. You can't hide in a tent and deny this, right? She names him Isaac. So every time she called laughter, laughter, the reminder of how amazingly good God is to keep his promises. These things may have been maybe taken figuratively, for the women represent 2 covenants. So of course Paul's saying here, Hagar and Ishmael represent this covenant of the law, and that what Sarah and Isaac are showing us is the relationship with God through the promise. Now, some people would say, well, why would God use Hagar and Ishmael? And it's good to remember that when you go back to that story, how after Sarah sends Hagar away and she's left by herself, they're going to starve in the wilderness. And how God shows up for them and provides for them. It's not as if God rejected her or treated her that way. And God even says, I'm going to make a great nation of Ishmael there. But this is a good interpretive lens because we read a lot of stories in the Bible this way. Sometimes people will say, well, how can you read Noah's Ark, as a symbol of baptism, that the ark is like the church. And what carries us through the flood? The church carries us through the life storms. Or Moses going through the Red Sea, what does that represent? How God parts the waters to lead us into new life in Christ. Or even I've heard the story of the Good Samaritan. He's going from the road from Jerusalem down to Jericho. Jericho, for a lot of Jewish people, symbolized rebellion. Symbolized turning away from God. Because remember, God's first command when the people come into the promised land is tear down Jericho. So what is it teaching us on a spiritual level? This man's leaving the holiness of Jerusalem, going to Jericho, and on the way, in a life of rebellion of God, he gets beaten up and left. And what does Jesus do? He comes and he rescues us. So again, when people say, well, how can you interpret it metaphorically like that? Well, Paul does that. And he shows us there's ways to read these stories figurative way. Can you think of any other examples where you've heard that done? Well, Paul's doing that here in verse 25. He says, now Hagar's down again Mount Sinai, and Arabia corresponds to the present city of Jerusalem. But the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, be glad, O barren woman who bears no children. Break forth and cry aloud, you have no labor pains, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband. From Isaiah 54, verse 1. And that theme of barrenness is, of course, throughout the Bible too. Who are some other women you know of that were barren and then God blessed them with a child? Can you think of other examples?
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, yeah. Mother of John the Baptist, good. Any others? Thought about Hannah, the mother of Samuel, the prophet Samuel. So yeah, a lot of times when those stories are told in the Bible, there is a period in history where there's spiritual closed offness from God. Closed offness, you know what I mean? That there's a barrenness of the spiritual life, and this child is born, whether it's Samuel or Isaac or John the Baptist, represents that God is doing something new. God's going to bring about a new era here. Now, you brothers, verse 28, like Isaac, are children of the promise. At that time, the son born in the ordinary way was persecuted, the son born by the power of the Spirit. So Ishmael and Isaac, there's that tension that exists between the families as they go their ways. I don't know exactly what happened to Hagar after she leaves. A lot of the nations around Israel, Edom and Moab, they can trace back to, Esau and Lot, but I don't remember what happened. We hear about the Ishmaelites. In fact, when Joseph was sold by his brothers and thrown in a pit, they got him out and they sold him to some Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. Oh, that's another place where this people of Ishmael pop up, that they're around and they have a part in that story. A little bit further here, but what does the scripture say? Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with the inheritance of the free woman's son. Harsh sounding language there. That's from Genesis 21:10. And you have to read that by remembering what Pastor Scott was just talking about. Because God's initial vision and purpose was to bless all people. So even though it sounds harsh here of for Hagar and Ishmael, that ultimately God is orchestrated doing all of this so that through Israel, all people will be blessed and drawn into God's family. Therefore, brothers, we are not children of the slave woman, but of the free woman. And it's masterful how he's building this whole thing. He's now led up to that concept of freedom, which is where chapter 5 is going to pick up next week. Any questions or other things that you noticed or that stood out in chapters 3 or 4?
Can you compare or contrast slavery as we know it today to how they knew it back then?
It's a good question. I would first ask, what do we mean by slavery as we know it today? What example are you thinking of today with slavery?
Well, we think of slavery as something illegal, that it's, you know, we're keeping someone against their will. Back then, it seems like slavery is a common thing, and I'm wondering if it's a different word for employee or something that, or somebody that owes a free person money or something. What does anybody know?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Others, I'd love to hear what others think, but I would posit that one of the reasons our understanding of slavery has changed so much is directly because of Christianity. We know that the earliest abolitionists in England and parts of Europe believed that way because of their Christian faith. Now, there were plenty of Christians, including the United States, who advocated for slavery and used the Bible to cite that. But overall, Christianity was a driving force for why slavery is immoral. But back then, you know, 1 out of 4 people in the Roman world was a slave. And it was almost so common, it was accepted as normal. And there were a lot of reasons, you know, economic for that, but
The Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians.
Do we know what made a person a slave and what kept a person free back then?
Comment on that.
Drew was
Traditionally, when they slavery, they're talking about the Israelites and Egyptians.
yeah, Renato, go ahead.
was a slavery was you could be put into slavery if you owed money to somebody and you couldn't pay it until the 7th year. And then after the 7th year, you had to be freed according to Jewish law.
Yeah, in Judaism, right?
Right.
Oh, not in the Roman world.
No, Roman world, no.
Yeah, that was the mercy of that God wrote into the law in Judaism, but a lot of Judaism didn't follow that. And all the debts are to be forgiven. Yeah, that's why when you go back and you read the law, it almost sounds utopic, because Israel was meant to be this community that was so different that you accumulated land from your neighbor after a period of years. You had to give it back so that everybody would have. It's almost like a, you know,
Land lease.
it almost sounds communistic, which we know because of human evil, communism doesn't work. But it sounds like it's this, but then you get into the questions of, communism doesn't work as a state institution, but as the Spirit is in our hearts, how does that move us to this kind of generosity that Jesus talks about, and Paul's talking about? And Ed, I think good question, because in Jesus, those hierarchical identifiers of who's worth more break apart. That whole image of the body that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 12, he didn't make that up. He stole that right from the Romans, but they used it to say, yeah, we're all one body, but some people are born afoot, and that's their lot in life, you know? And Paul says, no. Yeah, some people are born afoot, but that doesn't make them less.
What?
So Paul turns that analogy on its head. That's why, as I said on Sunday, Christianity was derogatorily called the religion of women and slaves. They didn't mean that as a compliment. They meant it as an insult. But when the people who felt like they didn't have a voice heard this, they went, wow, I want to be part of that. So really cool. Any other thoughts or questions? Right. Well, let's go ahead and stop there tonight, and we'll finish Galatians next week with chapters 5 and 6. Thank you all for coming, and blessings as you live and walk in the Spirit of Christ this week. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.